Hello and welcome to the Association for Coaching podcast. My name is Rob Lawrence and I'm your host for this Boost Your Coaching Business series. Today I have with me someone who is going to share his journey and how he has evolved his coaching practice, living life with professional purpose, working in a variety of fields including with young women and those in prison, as well as associate companies. He's going to teach us how he has made a living as a coach, working from the heart. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today, Mark Bixter. Mark, welcome.
Hi Rob, good to be here.
Great to have you on the podcast. You've got a fascinating backstory. So just for our listener, before we get into some of the details about how you've managed to grow your coaching business, how do you see yourself showing up in the world today as a coach? And where did your entry to coaching begin, perhaps?
Yeah, it's a good question, and probably easiest if I backtrack to the start of my career and talk you through what got me here, which is not the most linear journey, but the start point and the end point don't always make sense, but they do if I talk you through the narrative. So I originally trained as an actor. So I was working as an actor for about 7 years and got to a point where I was feeling a bit fed up with acting, or to be more accurate, with not acting, because as many people know, actors spend a lot of time out of work, and that wasn't working for me anymore. And I did a career transition to be a theatre producer. I did a programme with the National Theatre, and actually that was the first time where I encountered coaching. We had some coaching with an amazing lady called Gayleen Gould, who does lots of coaching in the creative sector at that point. That was sort of my first interaction with what coaching was, but it never featured on my career agenda at that point. And so then I spent a few years working as a theatre producer. I was doing work for a new writing festival. I put on an opera in a car park in Peckham. I did some huge events at big theatres and spent some time in that space. And it led me to a kind of random twist of just meeting a friend at a wedding who was working in a criminal justice charity. And he had some work and said, "Have you got some time?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And started to do some work producing arts projects within the criminal justice sector. So I was working with people who've been in prison or people who've been interacting with the criminal justice system in some way. And my role there became less and less arts-based and more senior. And that sort of led me into career number 3, which was in senior leadership in the small charity sector. And eventually I found myself working as managing director of a charity called Spark Inside. Spark Inside, we may talk a bit about in this conversation, run a life coaching program in prisons. And it was whilst I was there that I was working in the senior leadership team of this charity that delivered coaching. And I thought, I don't really know much about coaching, even though that's what this organization does. So I trained as a coach at that point with Mo Foundation. And at that point, just to understand coaching more. No intention of becoming a coach, but through the process of that training, it was quite a powerful experience. I was doing quite a bit of self-reflection and realized I wasn't very happy in my job. I wasn't enjoying it and took some time out. So I left my job, no empty diary, not knowing what to do, and took some time to reflect. And it was during that time that I started to think more seriously about coaching, thinking, actually, I've just done this training. I really enjoyed it. It had a lot to offer. And at that point thought, right, well, let's give it a go. And so 4.5 years ago, I set up my coaching practice and have been building it ever since, to the point where the 2nd of January last year, I went fully freelance as a coach. And now that is all I do, really. That's my sole income. So that's what brought me here.
That's fantastic. It's been a challenging year for many folks, if not all of us, with the pandemic and COVID-19. How has that affected your work and the work that you do today? How have you managed to navigate this time and manage to sustain yourself as a coach?
It's an interesting question, because I suppose the entirety of my full-time career as a coach has been essentially during the pandemic. Just as I embarked upon that journey was the point where I was coaching full time. I've been coaching for years before that, but it was always alongside other work. And so when I took that risk, it was a bit scary at the start of last year, thinking, what does this look like? what does this year look like? We're in lockdown. Who's going to be able to afford a coach? Everyone's been made redundant or on furlough, and so it felt quite scary. And what I have come to do with my coaching practice is work with lots of other companies, essentially. So I've aligned myself with other organizations as an associate, so that I don't have to worry too much about my own marketing and generating my own clients, because I'm working with organizations that feed clients to me. So I suppose from a practical survival point of view, it's felt quite safe for me.
For those that are new to coaching, listening to this podcast, how have you managed to find and align yourself with the associate companies that you mentioned there, in terms of obviously finding work through them, but how did you develop those relationships? Where did you start, and how did they evolve?
Yeah, and I think that comes to the heart of my coaching practice. So I have very much wanted to coach people, or in areas where people may not have got coaching otherwise. So all my coaching really, or the majority of it at least, sits outside of the executive or corporate space. I'm coaching a lot with charities or with organizations supporting people around their mental health, or coaching people who are not going to have got a coach unless these organizations existed. And for me, that's been fundamental to my coaching practice. I think there's kind of a wider narrative within the coaching world and amongst coaches, almost a hierarchy of coaching, and the gold standard is high-level executive coaching. If you're coaching C-suite clients and you're charging huge sums of money, that's the best coaching you can do. And I fundamentally disagree with that, because none of my work sits in that space. And I think the work I'm doing is adding great value and is incredibly powerful, and is really bringing something needed and important to the world.
Yeah, excellent. So tell me a bit more about the relationship that you have with the associate companies that you work with and how you collaborate with them. So what does your day-to-day coaching look like, perhaps? I'm sure there's a lot of variety in there, but I'm interested to know what a day could look like for Mark.
Yeah, so there's a number of associate organizations that I work with. Spark Inside, who I mentioned that I was managing director with a few years ago, I now work for them as a coach, coaching within prisons. I work with an organization called Sanctus, coaching around mental health, and so working within organizations and people coming to speak about their mental health. I work with Young Women's Trust, and that's an organization that works with young women aged 18 to 30. Often can be career coaching, but lots around confidence and understanding the direction that those young women want to take in their lives. I work with Frontline, who is a career development, career change program for newly qualified social workers. People wanting to get into social work can do the Frontline program, get a master's degree. And in their second year, when they're qualified social workers, first year on the job, they get a coach to support them through that. So that's the bulk of the portfolio of my work, as well as some private clients. And a day can really be as varied as speaking to a young woman in the morning who's struggling to find her next job, to zipping over to a prison and going on the wing and having a conversation with someone in prison, understanding what choices they want to make, then coming back and having a conversation with a social worker who's just had a really difficult week in a really pressured job. So the variety of that is really exciting for me and empowering, and also very aligned with the work that I want to be doing.
Excellent. Yeah. Let's get into that a little bit more, Mark. That's fascinating, your work there in the criminal justice system, but also working with young women and young offenders. How do you feel that's shaped your coaching?
Yeah, well, I think the coaching in prisons is a really good example of that, because it really can take you out of your coaching bubble and think differently about how you coach, how you approach coaching. There are things that we tend to take for granted in coaching, or that we try to embrace, psychological safety for our clients. Now, how do you bring psychological safety to a client who's in prison where threat is all around, and you might be trying to have a coaching conversation and there are people screaming outside and banging on the windows and pulling faces through there. Also, the language you use, a question as a coach might ask is, how are you feeling in this space today? Someone might just look at you, think, what are you talking about? What do you mean, how am I feeling in this space today? So there's some of those elements of coaching that we try to bring to our work that we have to soften actually in some of those environments and think, how do I need to adjust what I do for this person so that they get the benefit from it and so that they get the full experience of coaching. So I think that work really has helped me to think and reassess and reframe sometimes how I'm talking about coaching, about what it is and how I actually do it in those environments.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And on the sort of flip side to that, Mark, I'm interested to know, how have you seen the benefit of coaching to those that wouldn't ordinarily have access to coaching? What results have you seen from that kind of work that you do?
So I think there's something right at the start of that process, particularly if we look at people in prison. So, and I'm talking very generally here and probably overgeneralizing, but if we assume that someone in a corporate job has had a supportive family and some ambition for their life, someone saying, okay, well, by the time I'm 30, I want to be a barrister, or I want to be earning X amount, or I want my own business. There's almost an inherent knowledge from a young age, from school almost, of what am I going to go and get and what am I going to achieve. Working with someone in prison and saying to someone, sitting opposite them and saying, what do you want? What do you want for your life? How do you want the world to be for you when you're outside of here? Question as simple as that can be really profound and confronting and challenging. For someone who has spent most of their lives being told where to go, what to do, you've done this wrong, you've done that wrong, have come from backgrounds that are perhaps not as nurturing and supporting, for someone to look at them and say, yeah, but what do you really want for you, can be the very first time they've been confronted with the idea of that, of doing something for them and taking autonomy over their lives. And it's those moments of connection and saying, look, what's really important to you, that to me feel incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's a really interesting insight. I'd love to ask you a little bit more about your actual business and how you manage your coaching business, I suppose. But before I do, and just on that theme, do you feel there's more of a call for coaching in those areas that you work, Mark?
I mean, I suppose the big answer there is, at some point everyone could benefit from a coach, right? There's lots of people in the world and lots of them don't get a coach.
Yeah.
So the answer is ultimately yes, both on a macro level, but also in the areas that I'm working in, absolutely. There are people who don't even know what coaching is, who certainly couldn't afford coaching, for whom it can be truly transformative. And if I can deliver the coaching that I do to those people, then I really feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing as a coach. The long answer is absolutely.
Yeah. What I'm hearing there then is some pride, actually, and there's a satisfaction that comes with knowing that you're actually doing some very meaningful work with people that coaching is going to make quite a significant difference to, you would hope.
Yeah, absolutely that. And I think that's sort of what drives me and what makes me want to coach and want to be a coach. I've never really had a niche. My own coaching journey has been a process of discovery. I knew I had this idea of that coaching could be quite elitist, that the people who get coaches are the people who can afford it. And there's a whole world out there where there's a lot of money to be made. And whilst I would love to earn a lot of money, it doesn't feel like the primary driver for me. And that question that often comes up around know your worth, charge your worth. I understand where people are coming from, and I firmly believe that that's important. But I think sometimes what your worth is and the amount you're paid can be two different things. So if you are coaching the CEO of HSBC, and through your coaching, that CEO adds £3 billion value to HSBC. You want a slice of that. Your value is huge. But in the places where I'm working, I'm not commanding those fees, but the work I'm doing is of equal importance.
And I think what's really refreshing to hear there is you've not deliberately targeted a niche, but you've perhaps created one for yourself simply by just following the work that you have felt is important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's the greatest gift we can give ourselves as coaches, actually, is authenticity. And what do we believe in, and how do we want to be using our coaching and the skills we've got? And everyone will interpret that in a way that is right for them. But for me, it's very much about providing that opportunity of a coaching experience to people, as I said earlier, who wouldn't normally get it. So I suppose if I do have a niche, it's coaching in areas where coaching may not ordinarily be found. And that's as broad as it can be.
Yeah.
But that feels really important to me. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. So coming back to your coaching business and more perhaps the operational side of it, or the personal side of it, I could say, what have been some of the bigger obstacles for you in terms of being able to get where you are today? And I'm curious to know how you've overcome them, but maybe for our listener who might be new to coaching or looking to develop themselves as a coach, what have been some of the challenges that you've faced that are likely to be common amongst lots of people looking to develop and grow their coaching business?
I suppose one of the biggest obstacles for me at the start was confidence. This question of who am I to be doing this work? Like, am I good enough? What have I got to offer here? And I think at the start that is one of those huge obstacles. Can I charge for this? How do I move beyond this? And some of those internal questioning that I was having around, am I any good? Can I deliver on this? I worked through in supervision. So I think that was really helpful for me to gain confidence in my own practice and the coaching I was doing. The other thing that I think got me to overcome it was taking a bit of a risk. So I was still working part-time and coaching part-time, and I would realize that if I was going to do more coaching, I couldn't keep working part-time. But if I didn't work part-time, where was the money going to come from? So there's this question of how am I going to survive? I had to make that choice at one point of just saying, okay, I'm going to leave my job in order to create the space for the coaching work to come to. Because if I don't create the space, then I can't do the work even if it's there. So there was a moment where I just had to have the bravery to make that call and say, I'm just going to take this risk and see what happens. And luckily that paid off for me, and that was, as I said earlier, at the start of last year. And that was really where I allowed my practice to flourish and for new opportunities to come in.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah. You clearly enjoy coaching, Mark. That's quite obvious to me. I'm curious to know, what is it that you do on an ongoing basis, perhaps, to continually improve your, I suppose, inner game as a coach professionally?
Yeah, I think there's ongoing reflection about my practice of how am I doing, just allowing myself those moments to think, how did I do in that session? How was I? Could I have handled that better? Or that session felt tough or a bit sticky, or I didn't know where to go, and just allowing myself to sit with that. Also supervision, going to supervision and helping me think about my practice in that space. But I'm also read loads and loads of stuff, listen to podcasts, go to webinars, go to courses, and keep kind of evolving in that way. And I think that there's something actually in that brings up again around the cost of some of these things and the money of continuing professional development and thinking about diversity within the coaching sphere and who's there and who are the coaches. And often who are the coaches are the people who've had some success of a career already, who can then afford to go and spend 5, 10, 15,000 pounds, whatever it is, on some coach training. And by its very nature, that's excluding a lot of people. There are many people who would be amazing coaches and aren't getting the space to do that. So that's probably a slight tangent, but it just came to me then of this idea of who are we actually embracing in the coaching world generally, who is being welcomed into that. And some of the people that I'm working with would be amazing coaches, and how do they get access to that? But anyway, coming back to your question of development and me improving my inner game, I think it is a lot of those things I mentioned of reading, webinars, podcasts, kind of accessing, absorbing, being a sponge. I like to take bits from lots of different approaches. I'm not one of those coaches who has their way. This is the right way. This is how you coach. I like to take ideas from lots of different disciplines and bring them in to how I coach. And part of that is just being open to all those things and understanding them and accessing them. And that can be, so webinars, AC is great for that.
That's great, Mark. That's really interesting to hear about how you're using a wide variety of resources to develop yourself as a coach there. You've raised a couple of interesting points as well in that. What do you think are the opportunities? What could be done better in the coaching world today, do you feel, to perhaps even the surface a little bit more, offering perhaps more opportunity or access for people wanting to access coaching, both for those looking to coach and also those that could benefit from coaching? What do you feel could be done from your viewpoint, Mark?
I think the fact that we're having this conversation is great, and that AC itself are open to thinking about coaching in a really broad way and understanding the capacity for it in different settings. I think there needs to be a shift in the narrative away from what I was saying earlier of top-level executive coaching being the epitome of great coaching, and a wider embracing in the coaching community how coaching can be used for many different people wherever they're at. From career starters to people not even in work, to people in prisons who haven't even been able to think about the agency in their own lives before. So I think there's almost I don't know, inverted commas, it's the responsibility of the coaching community to recognize who is being left out and who is not being embraced by coaching. And yes, these conversations and opening up and allowing people to know that the kind of work that I'm doing is happening and it's powerful and it's bringing value is really important.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing there then is at some level it's about awareness, but touching upon something that you mentioned earlier in our conversation today, it's also about accepting the fact that there are people out there in the world that don't even know what coaching is. And, maybe as coaches, there's more we could be doing to help your everyday people out there on the street, so to speak, maybe not on the street, that just do not know what coaching is and what coaching, the benefits of coaching are. And I think maybe part of our responsibility as coaches is to raise that awareness at that level too.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it can only come from us, because if you've never heard of something, you don't know what something is, then how can you access it?
Right.
So there is something about the coaching world recognizing the application, which I think it does, but also how can that feed into a more grassroots level so that it is running right the way through organizations from the CEO to the intern who's just joined. And that feels really important that everyone is getting the opportunity to do that. Yeah, with a couple of the pieces of work that I do with Sanctus, who I mentioned earlier, who coach around mental health, what is so wonderful about them is that it's completely open access. So the organization does not have oversight on who is attending those sessions. There's just a booking platform, and someone comes and says, look, I want to go and talk about my mental health with this person today. And that can be the person who's just joined 2 weeks ago as a junior role, or the CEO can come and turn up, and all those people have come into those conversations when I've been having them. So I think that's really important. And another piece of work that I've been doing, actually, that's probably the closest to the corporate world I do, with an amazing coach called Chloe Garland, who's set up a company called Quarter Life. And it's about supporting early career starters in their career and understanding what's possible and taking some of the pressure off. And so she's doing some work within corporate organizations, but often with people at the start of their careers rather than established ones. I mean, that's kind of slightly different to my other work, but it still feels aligned to me, because it's not always on who's at the top and how can they do more. It's a more holistic approach to organizations. So I think there's something in that as well.
For someone maybe listening to this that might be thinking of becoming a coach, what guidance or resources would you point them towards to support them to learn more, or maybe just get a feel for what coaching is about? Where would you start if you were perhaps going back to your younger self and guiding that young Mark?
I suppose to what I was saying earlier about the accessibility of coaching, there's an organization I do some work and training for. I run their coach training courses called the Mo Foundation. And they very much are aligned with what I'm talking about and what I believe in, of being able to bring positive change makers to the world and creating affordable coach training for anyone who would like to access it, and often free. So those young people who may have sort of heard or think, oh, what is this coaching? How can it be helpful for me? Can actually go and get a funded place to become a coach. So I think there is amazing work happening there. There's an awareness there for people to know that there isn't kind of a brick wall to accessing coach training. There are opportunities. And I think the next bit, when you've done that training, it's really about coaching. You know, for me, there's nothing more important than getting better than just doing it, and keep coaching. And whatever training you've had, really embed that, get that under your skin, and start to notice in that training what bits you don't like, what bits don't quite work for you, where are you pushing the edges of that. And it's almost when you've exhausted those boundaries that you then think, okay, what's next? What else can I add and build on here? And then stepping into that, you know, starting to listen to who else is out there, who, you know, AC again, you know, what are the webinars that they've got going on that you can think, okay, never even thought about that, you know, whatever that is, thinking about maybe NLP, maybe how do I use my body in coaching? You know, if you've learned about the GROW model, and then you think, hold on, there's a whole world of body and somatic work that I could be doing. What does that mean? So I think it's very much about just really, really, really at the start practicing what you can already do and what you're good at, and then building from there.
That's great, Mark. Thanks ever so much for sharing that. You've been very kind sharing your journey with us today. What's next for you?
On one hand, it's about keeping doing what I'm doing. I'm really busy at the moment. I've got a lot of work, and one thing that's next for me is working out and finding the right balance. So how can I structure a week for myself that is manageable and delivering the work that I want to be doing? So there's some internal questioning that I keep doing around that. But also I want to keep having conversations like this. I want to keep talking about the work that I'm doing and the importance of that work and the value of that work. And whether that be on podcasts, whether that be writing articles, I just think there's a message I want to kind of get out there into the community of how coaching can help so many people wherever they're at, that isn't always being heard at the moment. So I think there's sort of two things there. There's one, me managing my own work life, but two, keeping going and talking about the importance of this work.
Great stuff. And for those eager to learn more about you, Mark, and maybe our listener wants to connect with you to get in touch directly, where can they best find you?
So I am on LinkedIn. I'm Mark Bixter on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only one on there. I've got such a rare surname that I'm really easy to find. Or you can visit my website, markbixterlifecoach.co.uk, and drop me a message through there. And yeah, for anyone who's kind of interested in this alternative, even if it is alternative, if that's the right word, but this other side of coaching, then yeah, I'm very happy to connect around that.
Great stuff, Mark. Well, I think you've given us a very fresh perspective on coaching and where coaching can show up in the world today. So I'm really grateful for that. And folks can find you, Mark Bixter, that's Bixter, if that's correct, on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. and Mark Bixter, lifecoach.co.uk. Mark, thanks ever so much for your time today.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.